Energy Design Group. They are the leading solar contractor in the Carolinas. I encourage you to check out their website. It is redgroupnc.com, or visit Jeff outside, who can tell you more about what they do. I would also like to thank Forsyth Tech for hosting us for this event tonight. I think this is a fabulous space, and I look forward to talking with you more about how we can have more events here. And also for working with Piedmont Environmental Alliance. They're one of our community partners for Book with Purpose. They jumped right on wanting to do some kind of event with us around this topic of environmental justice. So I'm very excited to bring Jamie Meyer up, their Executive Director, to introduce our panelists and get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank you to our friends at Forsyth Tech. We're so excited to be here today. As Jamie mentioned, I'm Jamie Meyer, the Executive Director of Piedmont Environmental Alliance, and I'm glad you could join us tonight. We also have folks who are live streaming who couldn't come out yet, but we have a bunch of folks online with us as well today. So if you don't know, Piedmont Environmental Alliance is really your local environmental nonprofit based in Winston-Salem and serving the Piedmont region. And we believe in the power of people to create a more just, resilient, and sustainable future. And that's why we focus on programs that educate people of all ages, build community, and work on action across the community as well. So you can learn more about PEA at our website, peanc.org. So tonight we have some truly impressive panelists I'm excited to introduce. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on environmental justice and racism, particularly in our community. So I'll do some brief introductions, and then we'll jump in, and there will be time for questions as well. So Reverend Willard Bass is an independent community development consultant, organizer, and minister. For 18 years, he has worked to strengthen local economies and cultivate resilient and self-reliant community leaders, entrepreneurs, and activists. Reverend Bass founded the Institute for Dismantling Racism and the Justice Collective, a broad-based, cross-racial network of social justice organizations committed to working in unity for a just and inclusive community. He also co-founded the Share Cooperative of Winston-Salem and the Harvest Market Food Store to address food justice and access in our community. Thank you for being here, Reverend Bass.
Thank you for having me.
Nicole Gaines is an adult educator at Guilford Technical Community College and Rockingham Community College, and is the first Black woman to serve as volunteer chair of the North Carolina chapter of Sierra Club. She also serves as an at-large member of the Greensboro Sustainability Council, a board member of the Haw River Assembly, and is a founding member of the Solar Power Now Coalition, a grassroots group dedicated to helping the city adopt clean and renewable energy policies. Nicole is dedicated to supporting resiliency among at-risk communities and advocating for those most harmed, least consulted communities of color affected by climate emergencies. Thank you for being here. Dr. Russell Smith is a professor of geography in the Department of History, Politics, and Social Justice at Winston-Salem State University, and the faculty lead for the Spatial Justice Studio at the Center for Design Innovation. Prior to joining Winston-Salem State University, Dr. Smith was a certified urban planner for a variety of local governments, where he specialized in land use planning and urban redevelopment. He has served as the chair for the Alliance for Sustainable Communities at Winston-Salem State, and is the president of the S.G. Atkins Community Development Corporation. Thank you. And lastly, we have Dr. Rowie Kirby-Stryker, an assistant teaching professor at Wake Forest University, where she teaches courses in public speaking, listening, and environmental risk communication, and she supervises the Wake Speaking Center. Her research focuses on health and environmental risk perception and communication, and she is the faculty coordinator of Wake's Environmental Justice Knowledge Community, and is the faculty lead on Knowledge Repatriation Project, framed around environmental and, that's a hard word for me to say, epistemic justice. I haven't been in academia for a while. Before her career in academia, Rowie worked as an environmental education practitioner in the Caribbean. So we're going to move over here and start our conversation with these wonderful panelists. Let's see. Hey everyone. Oops, it's going to take a second.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm just going to clarify, I was the vice president for the Atkins CDC several years ago. Never,
Okay.
never president, no longer on the board.
All right, I got some.
But that's okay.
Fake
Thanks.
news, I'm sorry. So, I'm hoping just that we have some different experiences of working on environmental justice in North Carolina, locally, and in academia. So I'm hoping that we can just have some conversation. And so the first question is just, what is environmental justice and environmental racism? When we talk about that, what are we talking about? And how do these ideas show up in our community? Who wants to start us off?
Y'all look at me. Why are you looking? Okay.
I'm sort of just facing you.
Well, I am an activist, but more and more I'm an educator. And so first I want to acknowledge, I'm writing this down in my memory. I'm what you call a boomer. I'm not ashamed to mention that. But I acknowledge the original peoples and ancestral lands of Piedmont natives first, the Catawba, the Tuscarora, the Shawnee, the Occaneechi, and the Waxhaw Indian lands that we are on. First paid them homage for that. I am a constructivist. I went to school for adult education. I love doing things and learning as I go, so I see a room full of adults. I don't mind children being in here, but we'll be adults today. As Jenny mentioned, I am the first African-American woman to chair the volunteers for the North Carolina Sierra Club. Now, Sierra Club is an environmental giant and has been in the news of late. But I am here not only as a person who supports the Sierra Club, I support what they're doing. I suggest that if I have any Sierra Club members who have lapsed on their membership, see me, and we will go ahead on and put you back in the route because we are working towards some good information. So I looked at this, and I don't know, 2 minutes, I don't have a light. I don't see where, who's gonna hold up the sign that says, okay. There are a couple of definitions when you talk about environmental justice and environmental racism. Of course, environmental justice, and I had to write this down, is of course the fair and meaningful treatment, right, of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, culture, education, income with respect to the development and implementation and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations and policies. But I did my own kind of definition, and I'm hoping everybody else kind of went and explored their own definition. My definition, and this comes with, and I'm looking over here at my friend Michael Banner, because when I see people of color in this kind of room, I believe we're making some differences here. So, to me, environmental justice is the ability of communities to thrive and prosper without hindrance due to lack. When we're looking at the upward mobility of residents, families, children, businesses, and other community institutions to represent healthy communities and build upon its economic and ecologic, social, and educational strengths. And we all have the right to thrive. Environmental racism is keeping anyone of color from those goals, plain and simple.
Well said. Who has some thoughts on, concepts to add? And in particular, I think we've had some conversations locally about environmental justice over the years in our community, and I think starting to think about the ways that we are moving towards more environmental justice, or we're not. I think just how do these concepts show up locally? What does it look like in the Piedmont Triad? So what else can folks add?
I'll jump in. So the Spatial Justice Studio, of which I head up, it's associated with WSSU. Environmental justice is the classic example that we give people when they say, what's spatial justice? looking at this disproportionate impact affecting communities of color, minority communities, in the siting, in the location, and being affected by hazards. But it's not the only type of spatial injustice. I mean, it goes along with food deserts and transportation access and education and healthcare disparities. So all those have a geographical component. So I think here in the community, one of the things the Spatial Justice Studio has tackled through the development of an app and some community outreach is actually trying to identify brownfields, which are a type of environmental injustice, in which we know in the community we have sites that were once used for different manufacturing purposes, everything dry cleaners, gas stations, manufacturing and they've left behind harmful things in the soil, and they're there, and now, after 50, 60, 70 years, it looks like a field, it looks like a woods, and people don't remember that there used to be something there and there's something under the ground. So we've developed an app, an opportunity that people can actually go in and tell us about these things and give us a history and identify and locate them so that then they become on the radar so that people can think about remediating. And so that's one of the things locally that I think is not only just a Winston, but across the country is identifying these sites that we know we have. Usually the biggest ones, the Superfund, everyone knows, those are the ones, or if it's a downtown where there's a lot of development pressure, people are going to clean those up, but there's lots of them scattered across our communities, especially in some areas that have the most affordable housing that people have forgotten about. And so finding those, identifying those, and trying to remediate those sites is, I think, a critical importance.
Reverend Bass, can you add to our definition of environmental justice and how we see justice and injustice locally when it comes to environment?
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different slant. Just the whole idea of justice. God created us all as human beings, put us in the world, made a stewardship over the world, and told us to be fruitful and multiply. And we all had this same calling, right? But the world did not move that way. And therefore, some became co-opted by others. Some who had power and were used their power, right, to grab and hold and to take parts of our environment. Right? So for me, the idea of injustice, I don't categorize justice, but we do in our society. I understand that. And so the idea of me being able to move freely around, that's justice. For me to be able to go to a place and buy some land, right, that's free of stuff, that's justice. And so the idea for me is this idea that I'm a living, breathing human being. I'm also a part of the Okanese tribe, and and so I expect those things, but our society does not give them to me because I am not of that group. And so my perspective of justice then around environment, I have to learn those things. But I do remember when I started the our training back in 2004, almost 20 years ago, brownfields was one of the main things that we talked about then. And so I think, is it Lawrence, Michael? What was the school that was supposed to be under a brownfield? Was that Lawrence? Right, you all remember that. You all heard that, right? And I was just told that later on this week that that's not true. But it was supposed to be over a brownfield, which meant that there was toxic stuff underneath the school, right? And that's why they moved the school. So the idea of disenfranchising people around space, as Russ said, and pushing people off into other places that are not valuable, right? That are not wanted by others, right? Then gets you with this idea of environmental injustice. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think thinking about power and the way that power shows up in our built environment, in the water that we drink, in the air that we breathe, in the food that we have access to. We see these things every day in our community, and I appreciate the really specific examples and work that you're doing. Rowie, did you want to add?
I will add a little bit, but I must first say that I'm actually a new scholar to the environmental justice work in terms of academia, but I have experience working with local communities in the Caribbean. I used to be a fisheries environmental educator, And so I want to share with you what I've learned from a lot of reading, and also learn from the panelists and from you, because you're in the community and I'm fairly new to Winston-Salem as well. But adding to what the other panelists have said, I've learned that there, in the literature at least, there are several dimensions of environmental injustice. The distributive spatial type that Russell spoke about, but also participatory injustice. And that's where that's the angle or the frame that I'm really interested in as well. And this has to do with having people making sure that access to information so that people can participate in this decision-making about just environmental actions, that they have that information, but also that they are part of the decision-making, that they are able to go into court proceedings with resources and with knowledge. And I've started some work on that, and I'll talk about that, just very tiny, but I can share that later on. So that participatory dimension of environmental justice is important, and also recognizing that different groups of people, for example, Native peoples, have special relationships with their environment. So seeing that in a different, being open to different perspectives and building in that cultural aspect of environmental justice. I was also surprised to see that there are other dimensions now that are being talked about in the literature, like capabilities, how capable are communities to kind of engender or being empowered to make sure that their communities are just, and there are a lot of other dimensions. So it was interesting to see how broad it is, even in my own secondary research.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the one component that we haven't touched much on is how this is all connected with our changing climate, right? We know that our climate is changing. We know that we are facing devastating repercussions. We're seeing the heat waves, the major storms, all sorts of things that are affecting people, and who is most affected, and who, to your point, and to your point about power, who has the power to protect themselves or their communities, who has the power to make decisions about the way resources are used, or who has access to different needs that are growing as we see our climate changing. So when y'all are thinking about justice, how are you thinking about climate change as it relates to justice?
I think it's an important piece to it. I think when you think about, as the way you put it, in terms of who has the ability to adapt to change, I go back to when I was a planner and first learning some of the things about like flood insurance, and especially along coastal communities, and how people that have beach houses are paying pennies on the dollar to insure them, and when the hurricane comes through, their house gets ruined, and then everyone else is picking up for them to rebuild it in the same spot where it's going to get ripped down again eventually. And you can afford that couple $1 million beach house and the insurance, you have no problem. But other people that might be living in an urban setting along a creek, that because of enhanced development, stormwater runoff are featuring or are having more episodes of flooding on their property, doesn't have the same resources, doesn't have the same opportunity to potentially move or raise that dwelling, get to higher ground, because normally lower lying lands are just less valuable on a per acre basis. So, we really need to think about, as we think about adaptation and trying to solve some of these issues, how, if it gets a little bit warmer, I can crank the AC down a little bit, pay a little bit more to Duke Energy. What are other people experiencing? How is it going to impact them and their lives? One of the studies that we did 2 years ago with a fellow, community fellow here in Winston, was looking at tree canopy coverage by neighborhoods, and just the importance of that, just as being something that can help mitigate some of the urban heat island effect. And what we found is that the communities that are wealthier, have an average home price higher, have more tree coverage. And there's a lot of things that go into that. Other cities are studying this. We're not the only ones doing this. There's a big study in Durham about it. So I think these are some of the questions that people need to think about and that we're raising that specifically speak to that environmental injustice and then subsequently the climate change ramifications.
Nicole, did you want to jump in?
I just find he's absolutely right. Thank you for mentioning that, because when you look at areas, not just as far as climate change is concerned, we can see, we're bearing witness to this happening right now. Right now. And I watched the news, and I watched, I think it was Angela Merkel in Germany, where floods, historic floods. I paid attention to what the residents said. This doesn't happen here. This is a fairly affluent area of Germany. It's a small hamlet. It doesn't happen to us. Well, newsflash, climate change happens to everybody. It happens to everyone, whether you live in the gully or you live over up on top of the hill watching the floodwaters come down. TreesDurham.org. Trees Durham, if you ever want to have someone to connect with those folks about their study on tree canopy. And even here in Winston-Salem, you can look at a map and tell where your areas are, long-lasting, long areas where you have tall white oaks, and you have these nice elms, and you have these maple trees, old trees that are in old neighborhoods. And then you go over to the east side of town where they may plant these, I love them, I have one, these invasive species trees. I have crepe myrtles and I love them. I have a river birch in my yard, it provides good shade. But then you have those darn Bradford pears. Those darn Bradford pears will break. They're decorative, but they don't provide much shade, and they don't grow very well. So if we're talking about environmental justice and making things going right, it's time to begin planting those trees. What's the old the adage where I'm planting trees, the trees I will not see, right? Those are the trees I want in my lifetime. So, yeah, climate change is real.
Can I add something? I heard, thanks a lot, Nicole, you're so right. I'm gonna build a little bit on what you and Russell said, because just this week, a colleague brought to my attention the NPR show, Washington Post, The Daily. I don't know if you listened to this at 6:30, but just a few days ago, there was a great example of how climate change exacerbates environmental problems. So in Portland, where it was so hot and people died, as you know, some researchers went around and they checked the temperature of the different neighborhoods, and they found that the neighborhoods with the trees were around 98 degrees Fahrenheit, but the ones without, where do you think those would be? In the poor and low-income neighborhoods, they were 128, as high as that degrees hotter. And they also pointed out the cables for the cable cars were melting for public transportation. Who uses public transportation? So I think we are seeing that now, evidence of how climate change does just really exacerbate these inequities in how people feel the effects of climate change.
I think that as it relates to climate change and justice, I think first we have to educate ourselves. If one is not willing to research, one is not willing to seek out and find out what climate change is, how it happens, then there's no way that this person can be helpful, right, or even critical thinking around the idea of climate, right? I'm a scientist by training. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer, right? But if folks don't know anything a little bit about science and how nature works and how science works, it's good to go and call, go on the phone and say, seriously, what is climate change? That works, right? We have all the tools we need right here in our hands if we're willing to use that. As it relates to justice, the problem with climate change and justice is the fact that, again, you got people who have power and have money, right? They don't want their stuff to be impacted by the kinds of things that we're going to have to do in order to address climate change. fossil fuels, number one, right? You can go down to cars. You know, I made the decision now because I do anti-racism work and I'm a justice advocate, but I need to at least get, you know, serious about my car. And so I bought a hybrid, you know, and I was really against hybrids because I didn't think they had enough technology right to figure out, you know, whether it would work or not, but they did others. I love the car, right? Next time I'm gonna go totally electric. But the idea is to do things, right, that help the environment and don't hinder it. And fossil fuels is the main one. I asked Nicole about, I said, should I put solar panels on my house? I already knew the answer to that, but I wanted to see what her response was. She said, yes. Well, then I said, why do I do that? And she says, well, did you say get off the grid or?
No, I said you might want to either investigate community solar.
Community solar. And I said, what's community
Investigate
solar? She said, well, that's something about Duke. And I said, no, I don't want Duke in my business. So, but in North Carolina, right? Probably, wait a minute now. Probably almost the whole nation. Duke Power has some influence on our energy bill. So we're gonna figure out, see, I wanna put solar panels on my house and I want total control of that, right? I don't want Duke Power telling me that it's all right for me to put solar panels on my house, right? So that's a right we have as Americans, you know, I know that, right? I mean, I'm not privileged, but I know that. So we're gonna figure out how we can get solar power on each individual house and then control it. They control it, it's not Duke Power. So see, that's what we're up against when we start talking about solar power, climate change and justice, right? We got our hands full, y'all. So I'm hoping tonight when we leave here, that we're gonna be organized around fixing some of this stuff right here in the communities. Right here, right now.
I love that.
Jamie, can I just say one? The two things I wanted to say when I was hearing the other panelists. One is, especially with the tree canopy, most of the studies, there's a direct correlation between the amount of tree canopy or the lack thereof and red line neighborhoods. So, you know, if you don't even want to talk about environmental racism, just racism in general, financial racism, that it's all connected. It's interwoven. And the second thing, talking about the German floods, the interesting thing I heard about that was the German language doesn't have a word to describe what was going on. That's what they said. That's what they said. They said we don't have a word to really describe what just happened because it's never happened.
So I meant to say this too, though, when I started this conversation about the canopy, because my house is built on a lot that was totally canopy. And I like that. I mean, I love that. But my wife has been telling me she wants us to cut the trees down. And so now I can go back home and tell her tonight, not yet. We can't cut the trees down because it provides a canopy, which I knew anyway. I'm the one that watches the bills, you know, every year, like the fall, the winter, right? And I see it in the summertime, right? Our bill is not as high as it could be because I know we got this large canopy. We got some very large old oaks in our yard, right?
Just don't blame it on me.
And I have not been able to cut. I cut 2 down, and the reason why I did that was because they were dying. Right. The first one I cut down, I remember one day my wife and I were in the driveway, we were talking. She drove away, and this limb about this big, 20 feet long, came down where she was parked. So I said, you gotta go.
Well, if anyone wants to let us know for our next event, if you have a marriage quarrel. Well, I think a lot about when I was at college, I took a class about the built environment. And we had to go around to different neighborhoods in our community, we were in Durham, and look at what the built environment looked like. Where are their trees? Where are their sidewalks? Where are their streetlights? And starting to see the ways in which our built environment is so reflective of, to your point, you know, a history of racism and all sorts of systemic oppression of different community groups. So when we think about all of those, I know that that was really eye-opening for me, is why I'm telling this story, that just to see, you know, we talk about folks getting outside and being able to move their bodies and walk safely from one place to another. If there's no sidewalks and streetlights, that's a lot more difficult. When we talk about heat waves and there's no tree canopy in your neighborhood, you know, that what we saw in Portland is that more people died. So I just wanted to know kind of some of your stories that helped open your eyes to particularly the ways that our environment and justice are so intertwined. Does anyone have a story they can share? Basically, how did you get interested in thinking about and working on these issues?
I can start. in preparing for this panel, I tried to think back about some of my own experiences coming from a small island, and you might know that small islands are experiencing the brunt of climate change effects like sea level rise. But I thought about how, I'm smiling-ish, but not really. At my parents' home, this many years ago, a landfill was proposed for my neighborhood. It's actually there. It smells horrible. And so my dad lives next to this landfill now, and I remember my mom and I, she's deceased, and God bless her soul. But I remember us calling into the radio station, writing to letters to the editors, going to community meetings, which were really just a check mark to say, oh, we consulted, but everything was planned already. And I thought about that. I thought about being in the islands where big hotels will come and then block access to locals to the beach, and some of that and how that plays out, because it's the poorer neighborhoods as usual where those things are often placed. So I thought about that, and that's really my connection, and some of the work that I'm doing now, it's related to what is happening in terms of islands and environmental injustice.
What brought me to this stage? Well, thanks to Jamie and Anna. You dragged me. I'm a late bloomer. Maybe I say that because I just really didn't realize what kind of environmental injustice I actually experienced when I was younger. But this didn't come to me until I was in my late 40s. And I say that because I want to make sure that people know, African Americans, we're not a monolith. We're not all in the same area. We have Caribbean experiences, we have poor, marginalized, and I grew up in Missouri. I thought we were middle class, but we were low, we were moderate, middle class, single mom, one brother. I got into this life on a hike. If you're a Sierra Club member, most of the times you come to this kind of work on a hike. So I went on a hike, Company Mill Preserve, right outside of 421, going to Hagenstone Park. And it was delightful. It was absolutely delightful. So don't let the size fool you. I've been in a kayak just last year, so I'm going to do it again. But that hike made me realize how close to nature many people don't get to see. They don't get to see it. So it's kind of like the Plato in the cave thing. You don't see it, it's out of mind. It's not there. But I was curious. Curiosity will get you everywhere. Right? So this work, this walking, taking a hike, and then getting involved with the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective. Served on a leadership team with that group's grassroots out of Durham. Said, you know what? We're going to fight the ACP pipeline. You want to come? MVP pipeline. You want to come? You want to participate? You want to be able to say, you know what? This is wrong because you're going through the backyards of poor people. Digging up their backyards and putting a pipeline that they will probably never have to use, but they're going to be paying for. And then I got turned on to the politics. I did 2 years as a vote protector because, as you know, Sierra Club is a nonpartisan group. We just back those environmental issues. If you have a strong environmental record, we will support and do what we can. That combined with the outdoors, combined with the need to see people enjoy what what I see. The rights of others being trampled is not a good thing to witness. I have a lot of good friends that I met along the way. Belinda Joyner down there in Garysburg. I'm sure you've heard of her name, Danielle. Danielle Lash. Her last name was Lash, but she lived in Blues Creek. Blues Creek, Walnut Cove. Trevor, what was her last name?
Danielle Bailey Lash.
Bailey. Danielle Bailey Lash. Those were activists. Now we lost Danielle. She died of a brain tumor, but her fight was always is there. And I'm going to fight for her, something to get named after her somewhere in this town, somewhere in Forsyth County, somewhere in Walnut Cove. That has to be acknowledged. That it has to be acknowledged. So this work, I've come full circle because I've been involved with LGBTQ issues. I've been involved with the Women's March in Guilford County. We had a couple of years ago, 2017, 5,000 people showed up to that event for our Women's Rights March, our Women's March. This is not a competition, but we're talking about how we're informed. And you can get informed in any kind of way. You can be as involved as taking a phone call, or you can take the risk of being arrested. Wherever your comfort zone is. That's how I got involved with this, and that's what I'm saying with it.
I was thinking there are several intersections of my life that raise questions for me about living in life and fairness. But my father was military, so I grew up in the military army background, right? And I started school in Germany. So I went from K through 3 in Germany, and then we came back. We stayed a couple of years and went back. So I did up to junior high, 7 years out of the United States. And it was during segregation, but the military had said desegregating in 47. And so when I was there, we got this experience of doing life in a community where you had access to everything. And the main thing that I remember as a child was going to the movie. Every Saturday, all the kids in the neighborhood would go to the movie, and we would all run down front and get the first seats. And there wasn't nobody telling us where to sit. You know, we sat together, we did this movie thing, right? But when we came back to the U.S., I remember distinctly in Fayetteville that when we went to the movie, we had to go upstairs in the back. So there was a definite distinction. And of course, we know that's because of segregation. And so then those things were moments in my life. Number one, I knew that because of the experience that I had in Europe was that the world was bigger than what I experienced in America. I knew that. And so my idea was that, okay, I have this potential to do all these things in my life, so I wasn't deterred. And of course, my father always told me, get the best education so you can get the best job. Now he said job, quote unquote, right? Which meant that he being a businessman at the time, he had been in the military, he retired, started a business. He didn't want me to go into business he was in because it was a small business and he struggled. So the thing about justice and knowing about fairness was something that's always been on my heart and on my mind. But I did go to school, I majored in chemistry, became a chemist, became an engineer, got a job in corporate America, did that up to about 1992. And then said, I don't want to do that anymore, I'm tired of that money, that racing, you know. So I started my own business. I built housing. We talked about the idea of justice. My thing, I wanted to build affordable housing. That was a big deal, right? There's still affordable housing market now, right? When I was in that market, we were trying to build a house for $75,000, right? And before I started building, I thought it was attainable. But by the time I built 10 houses or so, we figured out that the lowest we could build a house for was $100,000. So we weren't going to be able to make the market. Now, it's more than now. I don't even know what it is now. I don't keep up with it. But I'm sure it must be, I don't know, $150,000 to $200,000 for an affordable house. I don't know what it is. But again, you know, there's people who can't even afford that. So the idea about justice, it continues to be on me. And then in '99, when I accepted the call, quote unquote, to come to ministry full time, I went to Wake, and I started saying, and I was excited to go to Wake because I said all of these folks are coming to this divinity school, this place where we're going to learn about God and about each other, right? Brothers and sisters, my brother's keeper, right? All this good stuff. But when I got there, that's not what I experienced. Right? What I experienced is what was happening in life. And so I began to think about that. Why is it? What's happening to us? What is it with this thing that we can't be together? And so for the next 2.5 years after I began to raise that question, I began to think about what that meant. And I began to talk to a lot of different people. And so by the time I graduated, I had this idea about a place where we could come and gather and learn about our history of our nation, and doing it in a way that we didn't shame anyone, right? And we didn't, hurt anyone, but took the facts of what we learned and then just did something about it. And as a result of that, IDR was born. And then since then, Shared Cooperative was born. And the idea about a shared cooperative is getting together as people and solving an issue. The issue that we're solving is food in Winston-Salem. And so I would say more later, but that's basically this journey about justice is all about. Like I said, for me, justice is everywhere. And injustice is everywhere. So it's not about environmental justice only. It's not about injustice of this, it's everywhere. We live in a racist nation, y'all know that. And we need to call it what it is and then deal with it.
Will you tell us a little bit more about Shared Cooperative and the Harvest Market and this idea of opening up access to food and using a cooperative model?
Thank you for asking. My brother here, Michael Banner, is a farmer. He's an urban farmer. And he's finding ways to provide food for his community. And so I'm hoping that at some point that Michael and community farmers like Michael will be able to have access to our stores so they can sell their produce in our store. The idea that we came up with, this idea about food, Winston-Salem happens to be the 5th largest food desert in the nation. Right? It's one of the richest counties in the nation, but it's one of the poorest counties in the nation. How can you have that? Does that, that doesn't even make sense, right? But so we have food insecurity, we have disparities. So we decided we wanted to address that. So 5 years ago, we started then building the infrastructure for addressing it. And then we started hiring Wake students, and they came and they did research, they had to do projects. And then 2 years into that, they did a report and said that no, there's not 11, there's 22 food deserts. Which means that instead of getting better, it was getting worse, right? People who live in communities that want healthy food, that want reasonably priced food, that want access to food through transportation, 22 of those locations don't have that. So we established ourselves then as a store, as a market that will provide that in the West Salem area. That's where our first store is going to be. We have 430 plus members. It's a co-op. You can buy and become a member. You can work, right, manage it. We're connecting to local farmers. We're connecting to schools, right? We're going to have 25 jobs when we open up by the end of the year. We hope to be paying livable wages to start with. But the idea is to break this chain, if you will, of disparity, of separation. The vision of the community is now we have a center where you can come, anybody can rent the center, have a meeting, have a talk, and do an organizing effort. We do that too. I got arrested, when Moral Monday started, right? When the legislature took over and decided they weren't going to negotiate anymore. They weren't going to allow other parts of our community to have parts of the decision making. So I invite you to come and join us, be a part of the Shared Cooperative, be a part of the Harvest Market. We actually sell food online now. We've been doing that for 8 months. You can go to our website, www.harvestmarket.store, make your order, call us, and we'll deliver the food to you at the location in the store, in the parking lot. So thank you.
You won't come to me.
We will eventually. And really, we modeled our store after the Renaissance.
I heard, I can hear some, yeah.
We love the Renaissance.
That's a lesson.
And we decided we want to model after the Renaissance.
I love the stories and how they connect with what's happening now. Russ, you've talked a little bit about some of your experiences, but what brought you to this work and what are some of the ways that you're working on environmental justice today?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick or shorter. There's no one event I can point to, no Aaron Brockovich moment where the well was tainted or the whatever. And at the end of the day, when I first was a planner, I had a vision of what I was going to be doing, helping communities. And what I ended up doing was basically shuffling papers and helping projects get approved that were already in prosperous parts of town that helped people that didn't need help. The grocery store got closer to middle and upper class people, that there was already stores closer to them, And I got kind of just tired of thinking about why is there such an inequality in the geography of cities when the city's supposed to be for everybody. for me, kind of thinking about the city as a place that we all come to, like, I tell my students all the time, if you want to move to the middle of Montana and buy 1,000 acres and live on your own and get off the grid and hunt food and, you know, that's great. You can do whatever you want on that. But if you live in a city, you are agreeing to participate in a civilized conversation, interaction with people that we're all providing. We're coming together to share resources. And I think those resources need to be equitably distributed. And so as a planner, I didn't feel that was happening. And planners in general, I think we end up, you know, there's a whole bunch of reasons, but we should be planning for children, for older populations, for communities in need, not for middle class, suburban, minivan driving people. You know, I mean, they're gonna survive. If the target gets put a little bit further away from them, they're still gonna get there, they can find the time, it's gonna work out, and I think the environmental justice is just one of those spatial injustices. When we think about economic, transportation, social, all these other justices that get wrapped under that spatial, you know, name, that's what drew me to it, is thinking that there's a lot systemically racist in the way our cities are designed and developed, and it doesn't have to be that way. We can actually design them however we want. It just takes people going to meetings, having their voice heard, asking for something different. And maybe asking for less, being like, you know what, I don't need another grocery store in my neighborhood. It can go somewhere else. We can help other communities.
That's a great example that I actually think is, let's just sit with that for a minute too. As folks that, when you have privilege, it's also your responsibility to say, we're okay now. We need to look at our whole city, our whole community. Because ultimately, we're only, to your point, if we're living together, we're a community. We're only doing as well as the person that has the least, as our neighbor. So we're going to switch it up and just have some opportunity for questions for our last 15 minutes or so here. We have an amazing panel, so I'm sure that there are plenty of folks who've got questions. You all want to just raise your hand if you have a question, or stand up and say it? Yes, sir.
So I'm curious, in other cities, are there good examples of, like, talking with Harris Teeter and saying, okay, if you put 2 grocery stores over here, you have to put 2 grocery stores over here, and take a loss over here, but make it up over here with all the money you're going to make with the richer folks. Are there examples of how to work with these companies to get that to happen?
I'll go first. For them, in the private sector, in a for-profit capitalist system, no. That they're not going to do that. There are alternative arrangements. I think what we need to start thinking about and moving towards is thinking what are the results we want for our community? Why is it important for a neighborhood to have access to healthy foods? Okay, it's a health issue, it's an education, kids that eat better are shown to do better in school, it's a public health issue. So why are we relying on the private sector to provide something that maybe the public sector or a nonprofit can come in? And the health department, they could operate a grocery store. That would then, if the people are eating healthy, that would probably lower other public health issues. The education system would get better. I mean, but that's like really hard for people to think about. Like, wow, what are you talking about, the public health department running a grocery store? That doesn't seem for-profit, capitalistic.
You sound like a communist.
I tend to.
You sound like a socialist.
Well, I was going to say, I tend to lean socialist, I guess is the technical, but I've been called a communist many times as a former planner, for a lot less reasons in a lot worse places, we'll put it that way. But I mean, and I'm not saying that is going to solve the problem, but I think we relying just on the private sector to solve all these things, when we spend public money on so many other things, there needs to be enough people saying, let's try something.
So back to that, is there a government in the United States or someplace that's doing this? I mean, we need models or somebody trying it.
No, we don't have models when we do it. We be creative and we do it. We be the pioneer, right?
Thank you.
We be the risk taker, right? I hear you, I agree with that, because we're so used to having models and, looking at what others are doing. But in cases where we don't have the models or we don't have anyone doing it, why don't we do it? And why don't we take it upon ourselves? As far as the private sector is concerned, though, our nation is so successful because we have a capitalist model. That's why we're so successful. The interesting thing about that though is that we mentioned this idea about socialism. And I tell the story a lot when I'm having a conversation about helping others to make it in the world. That when the Pilgrims came to America, they didn't know anything about America, right? They had no way to survive, right? And they met the Native Americans, and it was the Native Americans that helped them, right? Socialism. We continued to build our nation. We brought folks in that did stuff for us, right? I said us, but them. They built stuff. Socialism. As we went westward, right? We got to get more land. They had the land grab. Y'all know the term. I don't know the name of that term. If you come west, we'll give you some land, right? But I don't know about that. I don't have to farm, but the government will help you do that. Don't worry about that. We're going to provide some resources for you to plow your land. Socialism. So we talk about socialism in one context, right? But then we talk about the private sector having the freedom to do what they want to do, right? So what is that? It's an oxymoron. We have helped the private sector all of our life, right? And we continue to do that. That's why we're successful. So we do need them to help us do what we do, right? They need to give us some stuff, right? They need to give us some stuff so that others can survive.
And we need policy change because they're not gonna do it out of the goodness of their hearts.
And that's where, from PEA's perspective, we really believe in the power of people to come together and create change. So when we think about who our government is serving and what choices they're making, we have enormous power to show up and to get involved and to claim our voice. We have enormous power to say, hey, this capitalist system isn't working for us, right? And we can't always look to capitalism to provide the solution of the problems that it's created. So,
Well, capitalism, it worked for your executives. When you got, you make 800, 900% more in gains, and whether it's capital gains or your salary, and you have workers who we can fight to make $15 an hour. Somebody gains. And the way I love our democracy. The version that we have a mixed economy, but it's a have and have-nots. And as long as we tolerate that mentality, as long as we, you're getting too much of the piece of the pie, I'm getting less. As long as you say, you keep over on that side of the fence, and I'll be fine. If climate change hasn't woke people up to say, you know what? If your fence is falling down, my fence is falling down. It's going to happen regardless of whether you live in San Francisco, Germany, Kansas City, or Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I lived in Winston-Salem for 18 years. I saw things come and go. I was here when the Rainbow News and Cafe was downtown on Spring Street. Remember the Rainbow News? Been there many, many, many times. I lived on Spring Street, watched Winston-Salem State line up its parade right in front of the house. Right? I remember when the library downtown was an old ratchet-looking building. Right? Things change and evolve and people move. One thing you can't stop are the movement of people. But there's a fairness. And I subscribe to, there's 3 values. There's about 15 of them that I can go through, but 3 of them. One of them, empathy, not sympathy. Empathy. Wear my shoes for just a little bit. Come on. They're size 10, and they're a little raggedy. Self-transformation. I can't make any of you do anything that you don't want to do. But we as panelists can give you a perspective and tell you not to fear. Right? Step out of that comfort zone. Too many of us are comfortable. Just transition. I haven't bought, I don't have an electric car yet, Rev. I bought a Volkswagen. I have a Beetle. It's convertible. I love my Beetle. They stopped making them until they become electric, and then I'll buy another. But they paid out $92 million that cities can take advantage of when we start moving our way to electrify our vehicles, right, and our fleets. Who handles that? I will cross that bridge. Just transition, self-transformation, and empathy. When you walk out of here, have it. And your life will change.
Amen. Other questions from the audience?
So I also believe in people power and would love to hear from each of you, if you're willing, if you could get the Winston-Salem City Council and Mayor to do any one thing, what would it be?
Great question.
Wait a minute. Hold up, wait a minute. You know what? Are there wards here? Are there wards or districts? They're wards. What ward are you in? 5? 6? Find out what ward you're in. Find out who your city council, who your ward representative is. Alan Jones is still a mayor, is that right? Alan's a pretty good, he's been there for a long time. He's a pretty cool dude. Right? It's not him. It's those other folks that are right directly that you elected. You guys are fortunate. I'm a volunteer on my sustainability council. You guys have a paid person, a sustainability manager, right? Go to your website, look up boards and commissions, see when they meet, and show up. They do what they do because they feel that you elected me to do something, and I'm doing okay doing that something that you don't know I'm doing. Show up and say, hey, I'm a people power person. And this is what I'm looking to do. And then mobilize.
I like it. We're going to show up. We're going to mobilize. I think your question too is, to what end? So if y'all could think of one policy or one change that you'd like to see yesterday for our city, what would it be?
I had a meeting with the city manager 3 weeks ago, and the assistant city manager, who is now over the diversity, inclusivity, and equity department, new department formed because of the $100 or so million that the city got, with the money coming in to infuse our community, and there's dollars that are specifically targeted toward underserved areas, small businesses. And so I would want then the city to be direct, expeditiously, right, getting this money to the small businesses that need it. They have $51 million they have now, and they're going to get another $51 million or so in about 2 or 3 years. But the idea is to put it to places where there's small businesses that need that help, that stimulus. So I would, and I've always started the process, so it's not, I wouldn't need to do that. But I would encourage others to ask the same questions. And also, if you all remember, there was a commission meeting, a city council meeting not long ago where there was a resolution passed to begin to evaluate or research reparations. Y'all remember that? Well, my organization responded to that. It's called Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations. Our response, when we saw it in the paper, was let's not wait for the federal government to research it, right? Let's start the process ourselves, and let's begin to look at areas where we can make a difference. And what I have said in it was that Winston-Salem has their own Tulsa, is that the place where?
Tulsa.
They have their own Wilmington. If you all don't know about Wilmington, right? Get the book, The Wilmington Lie, right? Because we had our own Tulsa in Wilmington. And I believe we had our own Tulsa here in Winston. Now, I'm not from here. I've been here since 1980. I've been here a long time. And the reason why I'm saying this is because the only reason why our culture is the way it is because things happen to cause us to be socialized and conditioned to do something or not. And the way Tulsa was shaped, right, affected people for hundreds of years. Wilmington was the same way. When I was doing anti-racism training across the state, we went to Wilmington, and I overheard people talking about this story. I couldn't get nobody to tell me about it because, again, of the impact of the trauma, right, and the things that happened with that story. And so I believe, and again, I'm not trying to put whatever out, but I believe that Winston has their own story. It may not be as horrific, right, but it had ways to socialize and condition the culture in Winston-Salem so that it is the way it is. And I'm saying through the Truth and Reconciliation work, let's address that, right? Let's come in a room like this, and let's tell it. Let's tell the truth, right? And then let's take that truth, and then let's move forward, right? Let's seek forgiveness, right? Right? Let's repent, and then let's do the work. I believe something like that will make it.
For me, not to be on my soapbox, because there's so many different things, and you think about little policies and big policies, I think if they could weigh any decision against, is this making our city more spatially just, I think that would be great, whether it's spending money, whether it's approving developments, widening a road, whatever it might be, how is it related to access, inclusivity, equity across the geographies of the city? And world peace.
I would like to ask for a lot more for the city to really look to see where their policies are perpetuating injustice and fix them. I would like them to start with housing. Housing has been linked to disproportionate consequences and health outcomes. It has been linked to education, access. It has been linked to so many things, and so that's where I would like them to start.
The list is long, but we do have to show up to get started. Absolutely. I think there was one last question over here, and then we're,
I think we shared something we wanted to.
yeah, that was my one.
Yeah,
Tim.
thank you all for being here and sharing your perspectives. There would be no environmental injustice if there weren't racial injustice. If we look at this as an intersectional issue, this is about food, it's about housing, it's about access to education, it's about health care, it's about all the things that disturb and distress our ability to live safely. Unfortunately, we live in a country now that's characterized by single issues. COVID was an issue that was never successfully related to climate change, for example. Immigration reform has never been linked to either, although there's clearly direct connection. Do you think it's possible in a country that has a single issue mindset to acknowledge this, the importance of looking at these as intersected issues and make the hard decisions that are necessary to correct?
I'm just going to summarize it into the microphone, but we're facing this intersectionality of issues when it comes to the environment, when it comes to racial injustice, right, that there are these connections. And Tim's point is that as a country, we seem to be able to focus only on single issues. And so how can we, and what are the ways in which we can start to think about these intersectional systems that are, really the existential threats that we are facing?
Yes.
More events like this, more events. I'm no expert. I'm not an expert in activism. I just talk about the experiences, right? So when you get a cross-section of people in their wheelhouse, or maybe outside of their wheelhouse, and you come together and you start solving problems. To answer your question, yes, racism, systemic poverty, all these things come from something. Can it be fixed? I am the optimist. I think it can, but it's going to take a very, very, very long time. I think there are lots of players who are part of a generation of people who were raised a certain way and raised as racists. I believe they are in our legislature. I believe if I look at some old footage of where we came from, where strange fruit were hanging all over the South, I certainly believe that there are people in our government who are doing those kinds of things and who, and it's just conspiracy theory, but I really think it's the truth, because how else can you not face what we're doing right now to our country, denying people the right to vote, for heaven's sake. The vote, clean water, clean energy. What kind of sense, what kind of hatred do you have for people of color, that you want to deny people that? And you live in the same country.
I think the one potential, I tend to be optimistic too, trying to get the next generation to think about these issues and deal with these things and tackle some of these topics, is that, yes, while there is this single issue mentality, these issues are so complicated. One of the things it allows is for a lot of people to find a place to join. I don't care about the environment, but I like housing, or transportation is important to me, or, because we're starting to realize how it's a web of issues, that maybe there's enough there for everybody to eventually, come together so that we can make a change. Maybe that's just, too optimistic, but I see it in the classroom. When I first started WSSU, there was a course, environmental geography, and no one signed up for that course ever, and so after the first, it wasn't my fault, it was already on the books, I had to just take it over. So I said, one of the things when I was a planner that was really important to me, and when I came to WSSU, was trying to get more people that didn't look like me in the planning profession.
Absolutely.
We have enough 45-year-old white guys making decisions, and so I said, Kim, what do you think about starting like an urban studies minor to get people involved in planning, community development, these issues, love it, go with it. So I took that course and renamed it Environmental Justice and Sustainability, and now it fills up all the time. There's a lot of the same concepts, and part of it's marketing, but people show up and they're like, well, I'm not interested in, I didn't like the environmental justice part, but I like the sustainability part. And by the end of the semester, they're liking the environmental justice, and they see the connection to education, and public health, and all these things. So I think there's hope there. If we don't have hope, then, I don't know. So lonely existence, I think.
I'll just add that one direction that Piedmont Environmental Alliance is taking is to think that it's not just that the country focuses on single issues, but in fact, just the way we live our lives tend to be sort of segregated, or we tend to focus. We have one area, that we study, or we have, the way that we do our job every day, the people that we talk to. And our city government is the same. You're going into the city government building, or maybe not, but you're seeing the same people. And so one of the routes that we're taking is, how can we bring people together across sectors, even to think about these issues, so that when we talk about transportation, or we talk about food access, or we talk about water quality, how can we get folks into the room that are folks that are doing the cutting edge research, folks that are on the ground working in the community, folks that are in our city and county government? How can we bring those folks together? Because ultimately, it's not just that the issues don't work if they're not intersectional. It's that we need to work together across those intersections as well. And so that's one way.
Jamie, can I just say one thing? Island Culture Z. I want to give you 30 seconds to tell us what you do. Please.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I appreciate this panel discussion. I think this is perfect timing, how you brought this collective together. I think, I don't know the quote, but like they say, we're the ones we've been waiting on. So, I think it's just like a prime opportunity. Just like they said, the American Rescue Plan is on the up in the air right now, and even as Dr. Rowe said, if you need to find ways that everything is affecting the whole city. Even if it feel like it's on this side of town or that side of town, it's some way going to touch us, whether it's like anxiety or panic. that's how I look at, environment a lot of times, like, just the atmosphere. You know, even the vibes that the media put out, you know, that's atmosphere. You know, when you go out there, you feel nervous, or you feel like you're gonna get robbed or shot, or your child might go to school and have a bad encounter, that's all environment. So, you know, just doing these intentional, talks, convening all of our minds, you know, employing best practices, and, you know, really taking our guards down and inviting new ideas and considering doing things a different way, and also just keeping up our energy. You know what I mean? Because at one time everybody was saying, ain't no returning to normal, ain't no going back to normal. That was like a loud scream at one time. Now I hear it kind of fading away. So I just encourage people to keep their energy up. You know what I'm saying? I'm not here to be I don't consider myself a super farmer. You know what I mean? I've been kind of falling back because, you know, my original occupation was science. You know, this is why I went to school at Psych Tech, so I'm a trained scientist as well. But farming is something I had to do by necessity. So, you know, I had to feed my family, and I just try to encourage other people to feed their family. So the more that we take on this so-called red or black ant philosophy, you know, doing things as a collective, it's going to take a big impact off of all these industrial farms, you know what I'm saying, all this big industry here, industry there. We can just start building on our commonalities and going to bat for each other. You know that you might be privileged, and you say, okay, we got 5 Harris Teeters or whatever on our side of town, we can't die with it, maybe shift some of that to the other side. And if we have expertise in the room, like Mr. Russ Smith or Dr. Willard Bass, you know what I'm saying, who are good at, you know, bringing a lot of this to clarity and have already done a lot of research. These might be things that's real interesting to us. You know, I might be interested in 10 things, but I might specialize in one. But when people up here, I can just write notes and, you know, check back in and, you know what I'm saying, just sign off on the petition, and I'm good, you know what I mean? So that's basically what I do. I just do what's necessary. That's what I feel.
Thank you,
I
Michael.
appreciate you, Nicole.
We're so grateful for our panelists. Let's give a round of applause. There is certainly plenty of work to do, and Michael, I'm inspired to keep my energy up and keep doing that work. So thank y'all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.